chance to play with some incredible people in the Android Netrunner, rest in peace, and Magic the Gathering communities. But it's time to clean off the rose-tinted glasses and use what I've learned from the other games to dive into competitive YuGiOh. Going into week 3 of the league, we're currently sitting at 4th place, and in order to maintain that position, or maybe even improve it, we're going to be making our first considerable changes to the deck. I'm also going to be going over some of the key cards in the deck and how to improve on using them going forward. So let's get straight into that. Moving into the deck changes, we've got a Reinforcement of the Army, a Monster Reborn, and 3 Dark Ruler No Mores coming out of the main deck. Reinforcements and Monster Reborn are simply because I want to bring the deck back down to 40 cards, and I don't feel like it needs the consistency boost of Reinforcements, and Monster Reborn is just not something you can rely on as a one-of that's not searchable. The 3 Dark Ruler No Mores, on the other hand, are simply moving to the side deck in order to make room for 3 Super Polymerization. This is going to be our Ultra Dragoon, it's going to help us against Phantom Knights and Zombies, which we struggled against last week, and it's also going to provide us an out to the Bird Up board, which locks you out of special summoning non-wind monsters, when combined with Great Tornado in our extra deck. Going through our extra deck, we have 2 Cross Crusader and a Dread Decimator as our links. I've cut Wonder Driver for now, but I'm not sure if it's going to be a mistake or not, so it might end up coming back in pretty quick. For going for OTKs, we've got Sunrise and Absolute Zero. Escuridao and The Shining provide some super poly targets. Dark Claw just really hurts any deck that relies on the graveyard in any way. Acid combines with Absolute Zero to provide a board wipe. Trinity just punches big boards really well. Dangerous gets us started by binning Shadow Mist and Malicious off of Fusion Destiny. And Dystopia is one really good card that I have not valued enough so far. And then finally, we've got Dragos Dystopia and Starving Venom Fusion Dragon as our generic targets for Super Poly. I don't know if Dragos Dystopia is going to be needed, I'm testing it this week, so if it turns out that we don't really need Dragos Dystopia and I miss Wonder Driver, that'll be the change going forward. Let's go into the side deck. We've got 3 Draw and Lockbird because some people play Dragon Link. We've got 3 Artifact Lancia because some people play Dinos. We've got 2 Gameciel because against decks that rely on big immune monsters, having both Super Poly and Gameciel as our 5 answers is going to be quite potent. Great Tornado for when we face Bird Up. Our 3rd Cosmic Cyclone, there's already 2 in the main deck, but having access to all 3 against trap decks is going to be invaluable. And then finally Infinite Impermanence for when we go first. The hero I want to put the most attention towards this week is Destiny HERO Dystopia, who shares an effect with a very powerful card called Zodiac Dryden. That is, as a quick effect, destroy a card on the field, which hurts basically any deck that wants to play cards to the field. And last time I checked, that was basically every deck in the game. So learning how to use this effect well, timing it correctly, hitting decks' weak points, when it's worth going for Dystopia to threaten the effect, is going to be a great asset going forward, and I'm going to take this week to really learn how to use it correctly. With all that taken care of, it's time to get to locals. We're starting off with a 4-4 record in the league, and we're looking to improve it going forward. So let's just dive straight into the first round. Round 1, we're up against Toad Control. The first part of the recording is balked, but we went second and got to a board of Dark Law and Cross Crusader after our opponent set free and passed. Their remaining face down is a Storming Mirror Force they got off of a trap trick, and we have 4,000 life points due to having played a Hero Lives, and our opponent is at 5,900 from an attack and a Solemn Strike. Our opponent goes into Totally Awesome, who can't pay for his effect under Dark Claw, and passes back to us, bringing out a Dupe Frog in our standby phase. We normal summon Vion for turn, sending Shadow Mist to the grave, adding Ferris and Poly to hand. Vion then links with Cross Crusader into another Cross Crusader to revive Malicious. We use Poly to fuse the Malicious and Dynatag into Dystopia, banishing Dynatag to buff Dystopia and remove the Storming Mirror Force before swinging over the remaining board and dropping our opponent to 3,300. They then rip Red Eye's Fusion off the top, and we have no answer, so it pops our monsters and ends the game. Game 2, we go first and open with Fusion Destiny into Dystopia, using Malicious to summon another from deck, and go into Cross Crusader, who frees our Dystopia from the destruction part of Fusion Destiny. We then pass and Mask Change in their draw step so that we only summoned 4 times on our turn. I actually forgot to buff Dystopia before passing with Dynatag, which would have knocked out one of their 5 back row for turn. On our next turn, we use Cyclone and roll a dice because it's probably more likely to pick the best target than I am, but our opponent flips an Imperial Order on us. We need Imperial Order gone in order to continue playing the rest of our spells, so we banish Dynatag targeting Dystopia, to which our opponent chains Ice Dragon's Prison to banish Dark Law and our remaining Malicious Engrave. We go to battle and attempt to attack with Dystopia, who is met by a Paleozoic Dynamiscus, so we chain Dystopia's effect to pop the Imperial Order. I decide to pass the turn over. With Ash, Solid Soldier, and Honest Neos in hand, I'm hoping that the Ash stops them bringing out something silly like a Dragoon to lock us out of the game, and we draw into something that lets us go into some fusion plays next turn. However, our opponent top decks a 1-card Verte Anaconda that doesn't require them to summon from deck, and our Solid Soldier then gets striked on the next turn when we try to summon Celestial with it, so we just scoop up the game. Not the worst first showing against a heavy control deck. Both games our opponent closed out with a Dragoon off a fortunate top deck, and only the second game did we get ground out by their traps before then. We have answers to Dragoon in our deck, so it's just a shame we didn't see them in time. Our opponent also wanted a shoutout in exchange for using the recordings, so as promised, shoutouts to the guy who top deck Dragooned me twice. Round 2, we're up against Subterra Stun. Losing the die roll, our opponent goes first and opens up with the Hidden City and searches Guru. I didn't make it clear to my opponent that I was waiting to read the cards before announcing a response, so I wasn't able to use Ash here. A reminder that good communication is a part of good play. Not that it mattered, since when we use Ash later, our opponent has a cooled by to stop it. They pass after playing 3 face downs, and on our turn, we just get locked straight down. Fiendess stops Solid Soldier's effect, and Fusion Destiny can't resolve thanks to Gozen Match, which has locked us into Earths, as we have a Solid Soldier. Our out here is to fuse away the Solid Soldier, but we can't search Poly because we can't play Vion. At this point, our opponent has a full stun loop going, using the final battle trap to continually flip his monsters and search for more monster negates, and otherwise deal with anything we started building. We need a lot of back row interaction to get out of this, which we're a bit lacking in the main deck, so we get ground out. Game 2, we go first and set up a Dystopia, Absolute Zero, Stratos, and Cross Crusader, burning them for 1600 in the process. Passing to our opponent, who forces our hand with Mystic Mine. If we don't use Dystopia in response to the activation, then Dystopia won't be able to pop anything at all, so our hand is very forced. And they follow this up with Super Poly. As much as that card is great for us, it seeing more play is a pain for heroes since most of the good heroes are dark. They follow up with a set monster, at which point I Super Poly the Starving Venom with Absolute Zero to go into Escuridao, triggering Absolute Zero to wipe their board, but Starving Venom to wipe out Escuridao. They pass after playing 3 face downs. At this point, I get a familiar feeling from Magic of not overextending into a control deck. If they have Mirror Force or similar, they won't want to use it on just our Stratos, and most answers in YuGiOh seem to be negates rather than destruction, so Stratos proceeds to punch them repeatedly for game, at which point they reveal 3 Torrential Tributes. Turns out my instincts were right on the money here. Game 3, we open up 2 Mask Change, but can never actually stick anything to the board through Solemn Judgment, Solemn Strike, and Fiendess negations. We get bonked repeatedly by Goro until we're at 2800, and our opponent's at 3250 from their traps. At which point, time gets called on the round, and we honestly have no idea where this game was going to end up, but it was definitely going to be a long one. Unfortunately, our opponent was ahead on life points, so they take the round. It's a shame it came down to time, as these games felt really back and forth, aside from the first one where we just got trapped in their stun almost immediately. So that's our first 2 matches against control heavy decks under our belts, and both matches felt reasonably close. Some bad luck in round 1 with not seeing our Dragoon outs, and a shaky game 1 in round 2 to lack of knowledge around Subterra. I definitely feel like I need to put more back row hate in my side deck though, as I've been avoiding the control matchups by pure chance until now. Round 3, we're facing off against another new deck in Ignistas. seemingly a Cyburst combo deck similar to Salamangreat. Game 1, we lose the die roll and our opponent opts to go second. We build a board of Dark Law Plasma and a face-down Cyclone. Our opponent starts off with Ignista Island, which once we learn what it does, we Cyclone it immediately on resolution. With Plasma on the board, our opponent isn't able to do anything aside from set a monster and pass, so we use Poly to go into Sunrise and Absolute Zero and OTK. Game 2, our opponent opts to go first and builds up to Cyburst Wicked and Light Dragon at Ignista. I initially make the mistake of thinking Light Dragon's pop ability can be used during either turn. Kinda says something about the power level of other cards I'm facing. We have one of those hands where our only starter is Fusion Destiny, which we use to get to Pharos and ultimately an end board of Dread Decimator, Dangerous, and Increase. Not a stellar board, but it gets over Light Dragon and drops our opponent to 4600. In hindsight, I think I could have just gone straight for Trinity and punched Wicked 3 times per game since it can't be destroyed by battle, but I don't think I knew about that effect until it was already the battle phase. In their turn, they bring out Fire Phoenix at Ignista and attempt to swing over Increase. It's at this point that I realised that Wicked was a dark and not a light, and I should have used Super Poly earlier, but I end up using it to turn Dangerous and Increase into Starving Venom, so Fire Phoenix doesn't have any favourable targets. Next turn, we bring out Dystopia, pop the Phoenix, and swing for game. Not my best performance, no idea if I was feeling some kind of overload from learning a bunch of new cards in the previous matches against some new decks, but my performance the past 2 rounds felt better than this, even if they were losses and this was a win. Going into round 4, we wake up a bit and face off against someone who really thought outside the box to get a working remote duel setup. And they're playing Dinosaur Shadows, a combo I've seen mentioned a few times, so let's see it in action. Game 1, we win the die roll and go first, and we get a hand where the only play is Fusion Destiny, which gets ashed, so we set one of our own 2 ashes and pass. They open with Shadow Fusion, which I make a bad assumption that I can't ash because they can't use material from the deck because I don't have an extra deck monster. However, the ruling here is that even if the conditions aren't met to use material from the deck, the effect still includes the ability to send from deck, so ash can negate regardless. However, they go into Grista and, for some reason, don't attack our monster. On our turn, they activate Imperial Order, locking us out of any spells, so we set the increase we just drew and pass back. If we can at least get 2 heroes on board, we can unbrick ourselves, so our hope is that they hold off of attacking again. Unfortunately, they don't, and wipe out both the increase and ash over the next 2 turns, giving up Imperial Order after paying the 700 once. We go through a few more turns, barely in the game, at the point where we finally draw Shadow Mist, which was the missing piece to allow us to go off. We get to Plasma and equip the Starving Venom they have to safely deal with it before going into Sunrise and Absolute Zero to get some damage in. In hindsight, the Plasma was probably a perfectly fine end state and the damage doesn't go through thanks to Damage Juggler anyway. Our opponent sets a monster and passes, we attack, using Sunrise's effect to blow up the face down, which is a trick clown that revives itself for 1000 life points, so we only get our opponent down to 3400 here, but on their draw they scoop it up. Game 2, we get made to go first and end on a Plasma who immediately eats a Super Poly and we get slapped by Starving Venom, bringing Increase back to our board. In order to deal with the Starving Venom without losing anything, we normal summon Vion and buff him with Honest Neos to get over Starving Venom by 700. We then Fusion Destiny and burn them for 1600 more with Dystopia. We then use our Cross Crusader trick to protect our Dystopia from Fusion Destiny's destruction effect, buffing it with Dynatag in the process. Our opponent's response is a soul-eating Oviraptor binning a dinosaur from their deck, and they then summon Ultimate Conductor Tyranno from their hand. Thankfully, there was no Misc involved in all this, so Dystopia gets to pop the Tyranno on resolution of its summon. Back to our turn, we cycle Cross Crusader and Dystopia to burn our opponent again, and use Malicious Engrave to get to Dread Decimator, enabling Dystopia to pop Soul Eating Oviraptor and swing for game. Some interesting games here. Our opponent didn't really capitalize on our bricking in Game 1, and Game 2 we just controlled with Dystopia. I'd really like to shout out this opponent for making remote duels work for them though, despite not having the optimal setup. Another 2-win week puts us in 5th place for the league. But despite the same old record, this week felt like a marked improvement in my gameplay. especially in the first 2 rounds. Despite being losses, both matches were pretty close, and I was making better use of the tools the deck has to offer. There's always going to be more room for improvement, but it's nice to see that my focus on learning how to use Dystopia correctly this week has paid off. Okay, let's talk about Super Poly. There wasn't a single time I drew that this week that it wasn't helpful, and if I had seen it in round 1 against Toad Control, it would have been an incredible out to the Dead Dragoons. So this was definitely a significant improvement over the Dark Ruin no Mores. However, what wasn't an improvement was taking Rotor out of the deck, because for a deck that's supposed to be really consistent, taking your consistency pieces out of the deck, not really a smart move. Cosmic Cyclone's a weird one. I've been running Cosmic Cyclone simply because other lists have been running Cosmic Cyclone. But I think Twin Twisters would actually be better in our meta because there's no Eldritch or anything, and that's really the only deck I can think of that you desperately need to banish their traps rather than just destroy them. And then finally we got a extra deck decision to make. These 2 cards have something in common, and it's called Super Poly. Dragos Dystopia is a great Super Poly target for us. Dread Decimator is a great Super Poly target for our opponent. So if you go into a board of Darklaw and Dread Decimator, chances are it's going to get Super Polyed. Dystopia Dread Decimator, Super Poly. There's a recurring theme with all the good heroes being dark, and Dread Decimator just isn't doing much, just buffing them and adding another dark to enable Super Poly. So I'm going to take out Dread Decimator and put in Wonder Driver. However, Dragos Dystopia is staying in the extra deck because it's been a great performance. This past weekend, Drew Cordova went top 16 in a YuGiOh extravaganza with this hero list. And I'm not going to go into too much detail with the list. I'll link his profile in the description so you can go check that out if you want to see it in more detail. But I really wanted to just look at this deck and say that I'm seeing quite a few similarities to our own other than the obvious it's a hero deck and runs the hero core. Stuff like going over to Super Poly, which a lot of hero decks are starting to do, the general makeup of the extra deck, and some of the side deck options, including the Twin Twisters that I decided I wanted to try out after our recent locals. I'm seeing a lot of stuff that's making me feel good about the decisions I'm making when building our deck, which is great reaffirmation to see. It's also great to see a hero deck perform well at an event like a YuGiOh extravaganza that seemed to be quite big, because it means that this deck is still powerful enough to trade blows with the other top decks in the format, even though many people don't even consider it rogue at the moment. The one spicy thing in this deck that I want to draw attention to is Solemn Judgment in the side deck. This covers a big weakness of heroes, which is that they just don't have a negate that's actually reasonable to summon. We have Contrast Hero Chaos, but not summoning that anytime soon. So putting Solemn Judgment in the deck when you're going first and you know the opponent's deck gets hosed by something like Plasma or Darklaw, so you can protect it with Judgment, actually a really good bit of tech. So I'm going to be trying that out in our next locals, and yeah, this Imperial Order, I hate playing against it, and I'm sure there's many other people that would hate playing against it too, so I'm also going to just chuck one of those in our side deck. Because there's a bunch of cards in our side deck that are kind of just there because I thought they were good YuGiOh cards. Stuff like Impermanence, Gamma Seal, stuff that didn't really have a particular use case or a great use case. Gamma Seal being able to tribute Dragoon is great, but Dragoon kind of kills us the turn he comes out by just blowing up our board and attacking. So that's not great. So yeah, I'm going to be using his list to fine-tune our list going forward. I'm not going to run out and buy Pot of Prosperities and stuff. I understand his explanation for running them, and it does really make sense, but definitely out of our price range. So yeah, it's great to see heroes doing well, and congratulations to Drew for doing so well with this deck. Again, check out his profile in the description below. That wraps us up for this week, and I think this has been one hell of a week. We may have another 2-2 record under our belt, which is par for the course at this point, But we performed really well in the games we lost this week, and we've made some great changes to the deck, and we'll continue to do so going into next week. So let's end the league on a high with a big bang and try and go for a positive record next week. See you then.